Welcome to Integral Christian Network Podcast, where we explore ways of evolving towards a more loving, inclusive, and embodied mystical Christianity. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to the ICN podcasting. I am David, and I'm here with Luke, and we are really excited to jump into the topic of evolving our understanding of worship and what worship is, and how, Luke, you are helping to provide articulation for how that word has been understood, how it's been experienced, and how it's changing and evolving. And also, in my estimation, also getting kind of a horizon type view of what what our understanding and experience of it is becoming. So I just want to put a little maybe palate cleanser out there so that we can jump into um, some of the things that you're exploring on this subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to be here, David. I'm glad to engage with this with you and yeah, especially with your background and history as a pastor and worship pastor. And we have this yeah, so palate cleanser with worship, right? That word maybe means a lot of different things to people and especially in kind of modern day church settings, maybe more Protestant than Catholic. I don't know. But just yeah, what how we hold worship. So there's lots of things that we can bring into that, and we'll be tapping into those. But here we're kind of looking at worship as expression of devotion. So I want to bring in that word devotion. But then we're going to kind of be with, yeah, how is it that historically and contemporarily we've been expressing worship to God, and why we do that, and maybe ways that that might evolve, right? Or be more reflective of our understanding of who God is and where God is and how God operates. And then also, you mentioned our understanding of worship, I think, but also our practice of worship, right?
Yes.
So it's a practice. So we do need to have that understanding because I think a lot of times we just, maybe like I did when I was younger, and go to church and here's the worship service and this is what's here, and you just you kind of step into those modalities and the ways that it's offered. And I know at least I didn't really think twice about that when I was in the midst of it, right? Oh, what is this? Why are we doing this? Where did this come from? And it that form was very meaningful to me for many years. But there's been some personal evolution, and I think some possible you know collective and beyond evolution that might be beckoning for all of us and how we practice our worship and how we engage in our devotion to God.
Yeah. Now, when you first got lit up to address this subject, what was inspiring you?
Yeah, yeah. So, it was a few years ago. I don't know how long now, but I read a quote by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and he said, "To worship is now becoming to devote oneself, body and soul, to the creative act." And I read that and I was like, "What? What? Like what? To worship." Let me say it again. To worship is now becoming to devote oneself, body and soul, to the creative act. And something in me was like, yes.
Yeah.
But I was like, what does that mean? Because it like, wait a sec, like I had to break down some categories and understandings, right? Like, okay, this creative act linking to devote. So that's been a whole process of learning and discovering and exploring. I think to articulate it now in the way that I have, to recognize what that means and how that and why Teilhard said that and what the invitation in that is for us. Um, so I could say more about that, or we
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. It is. I mean, first off, he's so quotable because and not only is he so quotable, but the quotes themselves are not reductive. They're invitational, and they really do stimulate a reflective muscle. What is he saying when he strings words together. They're not just intellectual, pithy anecdotes. They're soulful remarks that almost demand a kind of response to them. And something lit up in you in this, clearly. And boy, this could fractal out into a lot of different implications and subjects. But I'm just, I would probably need your help to
Hmm.
keep us on track because I get lit up when this subject comes up. There's so much I have learned since, in my whatever, I'm in my 50s, so my whole life, growing up in the church, becoming a clergy person, being involved in worship, quote unquote, the musical side of that, going, attending a high church, community where the whole of Sunday is considered worship. They don't refer to it as a service.
Hmm.
They refer to the whole act of community, of um, liturgy, of building towards the Eucharist, receiving the Eucharist. The whole thing is viewed as worship.
Hmm.
And so you're right. I mean, you alluded earlier. There's a spectrum of ways to define what worship is,
Hmm.
and this quote is kind of a almost a launching point by which to just say this is how it's been defined. This is a very brief spectrum of ways in which to define it, but this is, as we're being attentive to the Spirit's call to evolve, this is what we see it becoming. So if
Hmm.
I put it like that, what stimulates you to push that forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, with that variety and multiplicity of ways that people experience and churches practice worship, I don't want to get too in the weeds of those specific forms or, the value and benefit of those that can be very meaningful and beneficial and in various ways. But as we kind of, mentioned again that devotion aspect, one kind of um conceptual, energetic, I guess sort of like underlying approach or um, energy that I found, at least in my worship past experience, was kind of this sense of worthiness, right? So worthiness is connected to the word worship, and in a lot of that devotional, worshipful expression, the worthiness of God was elevated in the extreme, and along with that, my own worthiness was denigrated, right? Or in that almost this comparative, like, I am unworthy, God, you are so great. Or, in various other forms, there can be, even in a more liturgical sense, right? This sort of um, active process of a need to kind of like confess or put down the ways that I have fallen short and reach God again through communion. And so I think that kind of spirit of self-abnegation or like my devotion to God is about, and the roots of some of that. Paul wrote a wonderful article, Paul Smith, a few years ago about this, in kind of like dispensing with the royal court model of worship. So that goes into some of the roots of a bit of this, right? Where like, the king is up there on the throne and everyone comes in and they bow down and, they talk about how they're not worth, they lower themselves in order to request something of the king, to make a request. And so there, that kind of whole element of it and model of it is like, yeah, and I don't think that really fits, quite as much anymore for how we understand who God is, right? There's lots of ways that God, has been associated with this, old white man on a throne or the kind of king idea. And so some of our worship reflects that royal court modality that is, maybe something we are perhaps ready to grow beyond a bit. Um, One other aspect that comes up as well is sort of this shift from being consumers or being, this kind of laity, clergy divide where like a worship service or even like a liturgical worship, right? This way of we're coming in and we're receiving something and we're sitting down in a uh,
Passively.
an auditorium and it's a passive, right? We're sort of like, going through these things that are being done for us, right? And yeah, we have a way of engaging with it, but it's kind of more on the consumer side. And this quote is pointing to something different, being more on the creative side, the creative act, the becoming makers. So those are just, I guess, the two prime elements that come up when I think about of sort of like some of the differentiations of past forms, and then what this Teilhard quote and more is kind of maybe inviting as a new forms and new expressions. Because in so many ways it's about who God is and where God is in how we in how we worship and express our devotion and relate to the divine.
And you said so much there. One thing that's coming up for me that, and I hear you nuancing the way that you're sharing things so gracefully. And I want to pay attention to that because when we enter into conversations where we talk about evolving things that we have presumed are either acceptable understandings of it, or if we're in that deconstruction wavelength, um, maybe in kind of a resentful state of what it did to us or what it didn't do for us. Um, that when we look at things through a mystical lens, we are not looking down on what we've understood things to be, but we're looking through, we're looking at, and we're looking forward. And it's not a condescension of what's come before. We couldn't be where we are if we weren't at our previous age and stage. So we can look at these things through a sense of maybe a holistic psychology that it worked for us for a time, but it's not working for us now. That's what evolution is. It you transcend and include without making one more important than the other. So I just want to nuance that a little bit. The self-abnegation part is very much tied to the patriarchal model since Constantine. I don't believe at all that that's what Jesus was saying through any of his teachings or parables. I believe that he was um, really communicating that he wasn't replacing the Caesar role or the Pharaoh role with a new one that was basically just a higher version of it, where God is still at the top, but it's still a toxic patriarchal system. And
Mhm.
so, like you shared, the whole reason why we gather is to appease this God and to make sure, I don't, first off, I don't think there's anything wrong with confession.
Yeah.
It's good for the soul. And in some new age communities, it's like, I wish that there was, maybe a little bit more confession. Hey,
Yeah.
this is where my shadow's showing up, man. It's sabotaging me and it's
Yeah.
sabotaging people around me. But then, secondly, that passive sort of, I come in, I pay the toll, you do the work, not much is expected of me. That's where the word service, church service comes
Mhm.
into it. And I want to pay a little bit of attention to that because, again, worship, as it's been conventionally understood, is more of that kind of a connecting and attuning to a higher power, but not with a lot of depth um, or a lot of reflection.
Mhm.
The words and the music tend to be, um, I would say, like Coldplay light, or U2 light or whatever. Like the music is very engineered.
Mhm.
The words are almost I don't know, like a teenage romantic poem. Again, I'm not saying that rudely, but there's not a lot of call to justice or call to depth or moments for reflection. It's laid out in a way to where it's almost like being at a mall. There's
Mhm.
always something going on that has your attention visually, orally, um, just attentionally speaking. So that's my way, somewhat verbose way of holding the two things that you've shared there, the self-abnegation and then the service-oriented aspect of worship, and then this newer way of being attentive to it, which is more of that active creativity. So
Well, and yeah, and we'll get there, and
yeah,
yeah, and you also brought in some of the aesthetics and the kind of aspects of from your background in worship leading, and again, there's forms of that that are, what you're describing is maybe a little more indicative of evangelical or Protestant forms of worship. But even like hymns, it has that same element of kind of like we're singing this, and a lot of the hymns, the language is pretty self-destructive and shaming. And you're absolutely right. Confession is a beautiful practice, and there is a need for us to express a worthiness that is greater than ourselves and to engage in beneficial actions of repentance. I mean, I'll even use that word, as low as that might be, right? Recognitions of ways that we do need to change and grow, and God is beyond us, right? So if we want to bring in the three faces of God, there is this sense of God beyond us that we're growing into, that involves ways of releasing the less than that we need to, and embracing you know the growth and becoming that leads us into that relationship to God beyond us. But
can I just connect to what you're saying there really quick? Because there's something really important there. There's a passage that St. Paul wrote in Romans. He said, where he says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." Now, depending on the way that you read that, that could be a shaming statement. But I don't think that that's anywhere close to what he was actually saying. Is that, yes, he's providing a kind of a framework by which to say that beyondness that we can connect with is there, but we were actually designed to not fall short and to enter into the full glory of God here now. And
Mhm.
that is a more positive view, or a more healthy, psychologically, spiritually speaking, healthy view. So I know you were going somewhere, but I just wanted to put that in
Yeah,
there
that's really
because,
good to
yeah,
highlight. Yeah, because it is about, again, back to the worthiness, right? It's not about shame.
right.
It's not about a shame that makes us feel less than, or that and that's where some of the forms of that get of worship get into, like that it actually makes you feel worse because you're looking at something that's so great, but it creates this almost this distancing effect. And that can be, again, in any form of worship, liturgical, modern singing or other ways. So like, I think it's an integration, right? Again, there's aspects of that that are good and beneficial because we're not God. There is a higher power, right? There is this recognition that we need to, and I think there's a longing within humans, right, to have forms of expressing, that transcendence, that beauty, that beyondness, that mystery, that is a way that but not at the expense of our own participation in that and our own power and goodness that has been granted by God, right, to help us in growing to, um, you know, I don't want to say not fall short, right, but to keep going, to keep becoming. So we have the God beyond us and that sense of, but we also have the God being us. We can bring in the God beside us too. There's a devotional aspect to that, certainly, that's in relationship, that's there, and also finds its way into forms of, worshipful expressions, particularly in evangelical spaces. But the God being us, I think, is what kind of Teilhard's pointing to here a little bit, and that's where the creativity comes in, because it's about the power, right? If we're honoring the power of God, if we're acknowledging and engaging in an experience of the great worthiness of God, again, okay, where is God? And who is God? Yes, God is beyond us, but God is also being us, right? So what is it, the worship? We can't say to the God being us, right? What is the worship from the God being us that is within, that is that power of the divine, that um, is an aspect of who we are and how we live. And so, okay, if we want to worship the divine in that way, well, how do we do that? Well, we create. We make all things new. We create from that um, that energy of God, or we might say from that divine being that lives and moves in and through us, to bring forth the creative act, body and soul, right? So it's kind of an inhabiting form of worship. It's a manifestation of, if God shows up in the world from and through those who live in the consciousness of God, then we worship from that God as that God and divine being through creative acts. So,
Yeah. And maybe it would behoove us to talk about how we're qualifying creative acts or creativity. You just wrote an article on this that I think is fantastic, and you do a great job of unpacking what you mean when you say that. And I was
mhm.
wondering if you could do that for us here so we can explore that a
For
little.
sure. Yeah. And so creative in the sense is not necessarily like artistic, right? It's not like, oh, I'm doing a painting or because then we have, oh, 'cause sometimes people say I'm a creative or, oh, I'm not really creative, right? And it's like, okay, we're not just talking about art here.
Right.
I can't paint a lick, right? If I try to draw something, I mean, my 8-year-old son's already a much better drawer than I am, right? So and I can't play music to save my life. You're really gifted in music, right? That might be our creative act, right? It might be a song, it might be an artistic expression, but it's definitely not limited to that. We think of creativity as forms of self-expression, right? So that's a little more holistic, maybe, like we're expressing something in a way that reflects an aspect of the nature. I don't know. What do you think about art? So before we go into like the more than that, for you as maybe as a person who's been a musician and engages in creative process, right? Because we can be in that, although not limited to that. What is it that how does art represent for you self-expression or a means of I don't know, I guess what is art to you?
Uh, like generically, not
Yeah,
specifically.
generically. Yeah.
Generic. You know,
Well, no, or for you. I
oh,
mean,
for
for
me,
you. Yeah.
when I'm in the zone, um, it's not that David isn't involved, and I realize I'm speaking in the third person, but I the daily David slips to the periphery,
Mm,
and something is channeled and flows through that the David that's at the periphery is having a blast
mm,
because something is being communicated and generated, hopefully, that is life giving to other people or inspiring in some way or connecting with others in some way. Music uses both lobes of the brain and it harmonizes with physics as we understand it. You can't see it, you can only hear it. So there's this spiritual side of I'm just speaking I guess at this point as like a musician, but there's something that's being communicated that's beyond words or
mm,
has words involved but is not just words. And like so for instance, and I realize this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but when we were writing worship music,
mhm,
it was the words were not about a king or about how unworthy we were, or they were either justice oriented or how like building inclusivity or absolutely falling in love with the infinite, intimate, or inner presence of God, or sometimes all three at once. And one of the last songs I wrote in my previous community was infinity, intimacy inside of me. You are one in three. Those were the words. So
mm,
so in that sense, like there's a flow state, but I want to connect what you're inviting me to share,
mhm,
some things that I've learned as a spiritual director or in my new environment here in the Midwest. Some people really love and experience God through farming
mm,
as a creative act, or gardening, or carpentry, or um, doing menial tasks throughout the house, I've asked so many directees, when you feel most comfortable in your own skin, what is happening? Like, what are you doing when that happens? And
Mhm.
a million, it's different forms of expression. And I will sometimes say, who did anybody tell you that that's prayer, or
Mhm.
that's a way of connecting with the divine? Use whatever word or passage of words you want to use, but that is no less spiritual
Mhm.
than anything else. It's
Mhm.
we're the ones who create the constructs of what creativity or divine acts of spirituality or whatever it is. Those are human created constructs, right? So
Yeah.
I'm moving your question towards me, and I appreciate the that because I love the subject, but I'm also trying to push it back out and say we
Yeah.
really need to liberate ourselves from what we believe is the limitation of creativity to the
Yeah.
freedom of any form of creativity.
Absolutely. So like, yeah, because I think I wanted to hear from that experience of you when you're, let's say you're writing a song, right? And there is that, aspect, and that's a creative process. But like you're saying, that process, it isn't just something that happens when we're making art, right? Or we're, having something that it comes from that is a representation of something, right? That's maybe what art is in a way. But when you're, there's creative process in conversation, right? Like this is a creative process. Like there's creativity in how we're choosing our words and this, moving with the flow of the process of what, and you mentioned that flow state, right? That's kind of maybe sometimes held up as an ultimate or higher way of being in that fullness of like the flow of this force, this, this life that's coming through us and expressing in some way. And that expression might be the way the lawn was mowed and the beauty of the, or again, you were listing things too that were often maybe connected with jobs or vocations, and that can certainly be an aspect of it in any of our, work, but also in our play, in our, um,
Actually, the carpentry and the gardening and those kinds of
yeah,
things,
those are play.
those that's what I'm saying is as I've moved here where people take pride in their lawns. I'm from LA in California. You hire other people to do and so all I'm trying to get at is that we have often put I wasn't trying to be vocational. What I'm trying to communicate is like it's been interesting to move to a different place where in people's free time they'll do creative acts,
Hmm.
and what I'm trying to also push towards is if that is life-giving to you, it's almost like God in the speaking to Adam and Eve in the mythological garden. Who told you you were naked?
Hmm.
It's almost like who told you this wasn't life? Like this, you're connecting. You're
Yeah.
connecting.
Yeah.
Nobody told you that, or somebody's placing value, or you're placing value. You've been trained to put value on this life-giving act as
Hmm.
not actually being quote unquote spiritual
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
creative or whatever, yes.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think I really like the word maker, like or making, right? Because it has an aspect of like, okay, if we go back to power, right? We have the power to make not just things, right? Although we can make things, expressions for like the expressions that we have the power to make. This is the making all things new, becoming makers with God, right? We have the power to make a moment, to make a it might be an organization. It might be we have the power to make um, you know, a connection. There's so many forms and expressions of what we make, and I love how we're leaning into the humanness of that, right? Like there's ways that we take pride in the there's an empowerment in that to say I'm going to do this thing that might be, quote unquote, very ordinary, but I'm going to make it beautiful. I'm going to make it with intention and with care. And that has value to it, that has a meaning, that has a significance, not just, for others, but in our own lives and who we are. And so, within and through and integrated with that humanness, if we bring in the aspect of worship, right, we can also tune into that divine inner being. That again, these are intertwined. It's not like a separation. Um, and really tap into like what is it that I'm compelled to make from the inner depths of my most authentic divine personhood, right? Like, what is the Spirit of God moving and flowing within me to to come forth as, and almost it's less about what it is that we make as it is about the posture of being in that flow, in that power, that we have through our divine participation, to be involved in the ongoing act of creation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
that may be, something that comes from the outside of this like inspiration of like, oh, this is something I see that, I want to support, or I want to help transform, or I want to make new, right? That's evolution, that's growth, that's becoming, that's transformation. And so the impetus of that again is not necessarily going to be something that is outside of ourselves, like the order from the king on high, right? Go and
Right.
do this and obey. It's actually would arise from a deep inner yearning to express from God and to see that come forth into form and be made manifest in the world. And that's just such a different orientation, I think, than, so we're devoted, when when that force, that energy is there, I think that's that Tarot's talking about, the body and soul. Like there's this creative act, and actually by devoting ourselves to it, by committing to, you know, giving it the time and the energy and the attention and the process and the flow to come forth, that is worship.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's the uh I'm so allergic to this phrase. That's the cutting edge of what is happening right now, in not just in the church, um, but in the way that I mean, my goodness, the internet has just, and I realize I sound old when I'm saying this, but the internet being in terms of human history, being a fairly recent phenomena, is proof that there's just this explosion of ways to connect. Again, I'm using a lot of air quotes on this particular podcast, but
Sorry for people who are just listening and can't see you.
yeah, if you can't see us, if yeah, you're not on YouTube, but I think you can get the inflection. There's a lot of ways to express oneself now. There's a lot of ways to connect with people right now. There's a lot of ways to a lot of different means and subjects and um, avenues by which to connect with people on different subjects through different things at any time.
Mhm.
And it's just astounding. But when it's deeply spiritual, which is what, or it's drawing us closer towards a deeper spirituality, towards a deeper flow state, however that's experienced. That's the part that I want to keep leaning into, especially because community, we are communal creatures, even though for those of us in America, or at least the Northwest, the northern Western hemisphere, place a lot of emphasis on individuality.
Mhm.
Creativity is can be just for yourself. There are some folks where it's like, hey, have you ever just journaled just for yourself? Like you most of your life is built towards doing creativity for other people. What about doing something for yourself? That's beautiful.
Mhm.
But for those of us who are not wired that way, the communal aspect of creativity, the communal aspect of worship is not merely about, you know, conventional creative acts. You got to help me, Luke, because I know I'm leaning towards something interesting here.
Yeah.
But do you get
Mhm.
what I'm
Yeah.
trying to lean us towards
Really,
here?
for
Yeah,
sure. It's important to open up to the communal like we aspect. And maybe something that will help in that is also like I think you were kind of touching on this where like why we do this or what we're this isn't out of like we don't have these expressions out of the desire to be seen or
right.
appreciated or admired. That's kind of the journal for your own set, not for the sense of who might read it and or even like, we think of creativity and so much of that social media, this
Performative.
yeah, it's so performative, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say there, of course, there's great value in beauty. We want to, so that's important to hold and recognize like, okay, we're not doing this for that. And I think that's relevant to what you're bringing up here because so much of that stems out of an individual need to feel seen or valued or have some kind of affirmation, right? And so when we, I think, integrate more into the fullness of the we aspect, this is all in a series of we creating, right? It's an expression of our communion, of our communality, that has its individuality, it has its personal aspects to it, but this isn't just personal self-expression, right? The yearnings, the energy, the force that's going to come out of God being us. Remember, it's not God being me. It's God being
Right.
us, right? There's going to be ways that we are moving and holding that together, both in kind of the inspirational, catalytic, like, oh wow, the spark came from through these other people, and then this is how I can express it. Or it might be that the expression itself is born out of this communal engagement in inhabiting this quality, this flow, right? It's not just an inner flow. There's this interflow among us that is bringing forth all sorts of new ways of understanding and expressing and creating. That's sort of like it's like collaboration, but it's more than that, right? It's
Mhm.
not just like, okay, you'll do that part, you do that part. It's not delegation, right? It's this flow of collective, and this is where we space comes in, right? This is like we've in ICN, if you've been in a we space or if you've had that experience of this sort of shared collective interior energy and knowing and participation, that's so beautiful, and it's transforming because it takes us beyond that silo of self, right? And recognize that we are in union and communion with others, right? Like the mystics we read about. So, okay, we're experiencing that. And then actually as well, not only can we just, be in that space of we space of being, there's actually also as well this flow of expression of creativity that we can engage with and lean more into and create from that. So the communal aspect of it, the recognition that this isn't all just an individual thing, it actually, I guess I can't say it can't happen individually. But I think in the worshipful forms, in this sense, the creative act, it pretty much has to be communal. At one level or another, right? Whether it's the communal in kind of the gestation inspirational, the communal in the catalytic forming, creating, there's all parts of the creative process. But I mean, nothing is created, of course, in a vacuum or individually. But this is especially leaning into the we aspect of it is extremely crucial.
Yes. Yeah. One of the words that came up for me, I had to write it down because in terms of collective creative worship, however that's expressing itself, there's this incarnational humility and this authentic connection to each other. You know, referring back to something you alluded to earlier, like every church has its own liturgy, no matter if it's quote unquote high church or low church. every church has its liturgy, and liturgy just simply means work of the people. But sometimes it's just referred to as the schedule for the for the gathering. But like there I've been in certain circumstances where we're singing these beautiful songs, and I'm looking around and kind of going, is anybody else reading what I'm reading here? Because actually these lyrics are quite beautiful, and I'm feeling romantically pulled towards God. And I don't mean romantically in a sexualized sense, but just like, oh my God, I thank you for awakening this dimension of love.
Mhm.
Is anybody else experiencing, like, and yet when I'm in an environment where that romantic pull, that agape, eros, philia, storge, all the different, we can get into those later, but just when love is just become activated in some way. And by the way, I don't just mean like someone's banging on a drum and everybody's dancing. That's great, but I mean like when there's like a wee space, or if there's a march that's going on, or if there's all the spectrum in between, somebody's, a group of people are building a park, or doing some work. It can literally manifest itself in any way, but if it's done with intention, this act of worship and this act of creativity is is not is not configured as whether or not I am worthy or whether or not we are worthy, but we're adding worth to what we're doing. We're adding worth to the world that we live in some way. Not
Yeah.
that our egos are doing the worthy and imposing, but we
Mhm.
are participating in something that is elevating, or is expressing the sense of the best way to one of the easiest ways to describe this, and I'm sorry to have to do this as a musician, but like being at a freaking Paul McCartney concert or something, and you hear, oh, I was just at down where you live in Kansas City, and I was at a Nick Cave concert, and his whole concert is pretty much about love. So we're in this concert venue, and everybody's singing about love, and I just went, we just experienced worship. It just wasn't in church, and we didn't ascribe it to some tribal god. We just ascribed it to love here now in this room,
Mhm.
and people went away edified.
Yeah, well, and I think I'm curious about this because, like, would you, the reason it was worship was not because there was a crowd or there was a group of people and you were singing and there was someone on the stage and, these forms, maybe that, so it's not about forms or, like this form is wrong, there is some of that, right? Some are more beneficial or edifying than
Sure.
others, right? But
Yeah.
what I hear you saying is like the reason it was worship is because everyone was able to inhabit that love and experience it and be with it together, right? It
100%.
like
Yep.
freed them up to that. And that's such a huge part of like, yeah, what we're pointing to here is like it's about taking up our power to be that, to live that, and to flow forth from that. That's such a huge element. It's really the question of why, right? Like why do we, why would it be that we need to worship in this way as opposed to other ways? Because of that love, because love, and love acts, love brings forth, right? Like the world the world needs us, right? Like the evolutions and transformations that are called forth, they don't just happen from like a few spiritual heroes or like, this again, this sort of consumer passivity. It ties into that aspect of like, oh, I'm not worthy. God is going to do this, well, how is God going to do it? He's actually, she, we is trying to do it through us, like as
Mhm.
us, right? We are the body of Christ and we inhabit that and engage that. And so to the degree that we can welcome and move and flow in and as that expression of love, as you mentioned in agape, eros, phileo, these different ways, that is the inhabiting of that power, right, and then bringing it into the world in ways that heal and transform and love and evolve. And that's worship, right? Again, those are the creative acts that are participating in the loving evolution of the world, of Christianity in the world.
Yes. So that's the part. Maybe this might be a good way to bring this together. The universe is the incarnation of infinite spirit, and it has layers and layers and layers until we get to full manifestation. Humans, so I'm not going to get into other planets, but just speaking as humans, we have the capacity, we have evolved the capacity to become full-fledged, full conscious, consciously aware beings in this universe, that we are manifestations of the divine.
Mhm.
To fully inhabit, grow into that you could say it's a given, and it is, but to be born again, using John's language, or born from above, or born from beyond, to be born from within, reborn from within, is not a matter of these external tribal, nationalistic, political, yada yada yada, all the things. But to be reborn from within is to be become this fully fledged, um, conscious, divine expression, fully human, fully divine, and bring worthiness, like bring, like you saw Jesus do this. He didn't hang out with the upper crust and get dubbed an influencer. He was hanging out with people at the periphery. He hung out with everybody, but to get stated, he didn't like have a. He didn't seem to have a preference. He would include always the people that were excluded, and brought out in them worthiness, imparted to them worthiness if they needed it, brought them into a collectiveness that would restore that worthiness that was already inherently with them. One
Mhm.
practice that I do, um, and this is going to sound a little odd because we're the Integral Christian Network, and I'm not speaking on behalf of ICN at this point, but we're all judgmental. But I will own my unique brand of judgmentalism. There are times where, if a microsecond of judgment comes up about a person, I will say to myself, as a practice, an incarnational practice, not a mental practice that I just try to do so that I can say it on a podcast. This is my authentic, like integral, incarnational practice. If I see someone who triggers me in some way, whatever it is, I will say to myself, what if I manifested as them? What if my what if I am them? What if I grew up with their story? How does that affect my perspective of them now? How does I, David, how would I relate to this person now? Um, if there's a houseless person that I see on the street that I may be tempted to look away from, I will look then consciously back towards and say, I may manifest as them one day. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do that as a practice to say, what if I do manifest one day as that person? How does that affect my view of their worthiness now? What does that do to my judgmental, proclivities that have been conditioned into my way of thinking? What does that do to it?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right? So, in a sense, this is a worshipful act
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
now I'm seeing them differently. I'm
Mhm.
not seeing them according to my cultural conditioning or whatever, my preferences and all that horse manure. It becomes more of this way of saying we're all in this together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
Exactly.
is worship. That is imparting, not imposing, but imparting a sense of worthiness.
Well, and yeah, you're breaking down the separation and the setting apart against, oh, that, so that's again back into the we. You're communalizing, so you're inhabiting a collective recognition and being of a way that is held in love, right? So that again, you're entering more deeply into who we truly are. And that itself is an act of worship because you're making real, you're making manifest, like you said, the reality of our non-separation,
Yeah.
of our unity, of our being together. And that is, again, in this creative act, sometimes when we think of making new or making, it's like, oh, it's like this new thing. It's like this, a lot of it is actually about wholeness and restoration, right? And coming back into, who we truly are and the way things are meant to be or are really are underneath our fractions and separations. And that kind of maybe weaves back in confession, or right, these ways that we actually separate ourselves off from the whole, from the real, from the true. And maybe this could be a good sort of lofty, perhaps closing expression of what this worship as creativity is really all about, and really what we are making is heaven on earth.
Yeah.
We're being the makers of heaven on earth. Again, heaven not as some distant, transcendent future reality that we go to after we die, but heaven as the realm of God coexisting here and now and coming more and more into incarnation, into form, into expression. To me is what evolution is all about, loving evolution. And so we're not just passive onlookers to that process and see, oh, wow, look what God is doing. Yes, and also look what we are doing. Not and look what we are doing, and oh, what else might we do to be in that? And again, right, that comes from those deep yearnings within ourselves, within one another, presencing to those ways of how heaven can come forth more truly, more in the realm of making all things new. I mean, this is a little apocryphal in the sense of like that it's the revelation, right? This is the revelation, right? It's not some, rapturous return. It's that we are being that. We are enacting that over time, throughout time, in an eternal way. But that is the creative act that we are engaging in, and I think that's the essence of this invitation, this beckoning perhaps to an evolving way of understanding and participating in how it is that we worship, that we have been given, we are a part of, we are participating in the divine nature of God in our midst, um, that makes all things new, that brings forth heaven and earth, and we not only can be an intimate and actively engaged part of that, to do so is a worshipful act that is inspiring and enlivening and just wonderful. It's exciting. It's like, oh, okay, like that's I get to do that and be that, like that's just something that I don't know, jazzes me up, enlivens me. Like, yeah, that's the kind of worship that I want to be engaged in and living and doing in my life.
Yeah. And you said something so beautiful there earlier when you were referring to acts of like incarnational acts of restoration. It just inspired in me the sense that when we engage in those acts of restoration, that's where novelty comes from. I like genuine novelty, not the novelty that we're seeing kind of show up on, in the digital realm, which isn't bad. I'm not necessarily getting into that, but just when it comes to restorative healing, collective engagement, it's not the abnegation of the unworthy aspects of our human experience. It's entering into it and acknowledging it and healing it and addressing it and not again, not from top down but from the ground up. That, and then that's where the what can be what can come from all this, what can be evolved from all of excuse me, from all of this,
Mhm.
that will help us move forward, not through the transcendency bias that sometimes you brilliantly work address in your writings, It's not about trying to get to the next thing without having first addressing the things that need to be addressed. That can be applied certainly personally, but since we've been addressing the we space more, I just wanted to draw
Mm,
some
mhm,
attention to that there's that to me is enlivening. That form of worship, again, creativity worship, is where everything is going.
mhm.
It's it's it in that sense it is the elevation of the human species. Not uh I don't I'm not even going to bother qualifying that. It's just it's learning to elevate everything.
Mhm,
Everything.
mhm.
The trees, the birds, the animals, the whole blinking cosmos, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very inspiring.
Yeah, and I just want to weave in one more thing we mentioned earlier about the God beside us, right? So
Yeah.
we've kind of been with the God beyond us, the God being us. And God beside us. We are not alone in this, right? It's not all up to us either as singular people or even in, me and you and groups and we have that beautiful expression and reality. But this was such a gift that Paul always brought forth is right, recognizing like, hey, we have guides here. We have expression, personal forms of the divine that are present with us that we also express devotion to because they hold the wisdom, they hold the presence, they hold this power that can help guide us in all of this creation. So I'm presencing Paul in his spirit form, in the ways that he guides me and others in the community. Of course, right, we presence Jesus, Mary, Mary Magdalene, Sophia. I mean, I could name so many, right? But like this, they're participating in this as well. They're engaging in that loving connection and deep being and the the energy and of love and force that inspires us to be that in the world and maybe even guides us, maybe even helps direct us. And um, that's also just a beautiful aspect of again our devotion to Jesus or to those living beings in ways that are we're following the path of God that is revealed to us in many different forms. And that's just a great, I don't want to call it a resource, but it's just a great reality of, again, that deepening into a wholeness of relationship that is a part of the we creating in all of this, right? Again, the creative act, it's a we creative act that we are engaging with, certainly with one another, and with the forms of God beside us that are here to help us, to assist us, and to also be a part of making all things new and making heaven and earth more and more integrated and unfolding.